Hello friends, we'll be discussing the concept or rather the basic concepts of theory of consumer behavior. Now we've already discussed that how a consumer behaves when it comes to specifications related to the demand and supply of it. Now we'll be understanding certain basic concepts which are attached to this specific subject or rather this specific concept itself. Let's start with the first part of it. Now, as discussed before, the consumer derives utility from the goods he consumes, and utility derived from the consumption of good varies with the quantity of goods consumed. It generates three concepts. So basically, as we have discussed earlier, that the utility or the satisfaction what a consumer has, that specific thing is derived from the quantity of goods that he consumes, or rather, first of all, the product or the good that he consumes and in what quantity that consumption is done. So for example, if you love mango, if you're having a lot of mango, then the first mango that you'll be having here will derive a lot of satisfaction for you. Now the upcoming mango after that will give you certain more satisfaction, then the third one will give you certain more satisfaction, but after the third one probably the fourth one will start diminishing or rather reducing that satisfaction that you're getting, not to a steep extent directly, but a part by part or rather bits by bits, or rather in bits and parts it will be completely reduced, or rather once at a moment where you'll figure out that you're having the 10th mango, and that point of time you will figure out that your utility or the satisfaction is completely down. Now with this basic thing, there are three concepts that can be derived here. What are they? Let's read them. First is total utility, TU. That means the total utility, total satisfaction that a consumer has had right from the start of the mango till the end of the mango, or rather the quantities of goods or other quantities of the specific product that he has had. The product needs to be homogeneous. That is one of the basic criteria to measure the utility here. The next part is average utility, AU. That means after finding out what is the total utility, if you divide it by the number of products that you have had or other quantity that you have had here, you will figure out the average utility. And the next one would be marginal utility, that is MU. So basically marginal utility gives you the details of if one additional item of that product is consumed, is it going to add up to the satisfaction, or how much is it going to add up to the satisfaction is something that you derive or you figure out. So these three concepts are derived out of the utility. The first one is total, next one is average, and the next one or rather the last one is marginal utility. Now we'll be discussing on these three concepts itself. Let's start with the total utility first. Now total utility, it is the aggregate or rather average level of satisfaction obtained by the consumer from the consumption of all the different units of a commodity. Now total utility is the aggregate or the average of the satisfaction that a consumer has after he has consumed all the units or all the quantities of a specific product. What level of satisfaction he has derived or he has measured can be figured out using this approach, that is total utility approach. Now, if a consumer buys n units, that means x number of goods of product good or other x, then for him total utility from it is the summation of utilities derived from all the n units. So basically, if you have to figure out, for example, if you are buying n unit, n is said when you don't know the number of units that you're going to buy. You can buy 10 units. N is a variable that can be replaced with any digit that you want, 10, 6, 8, 9, 10, whatever you want. You can keep it like that. So if you have symbolically, or rather if you are talking about if you have had n units of a specific good x or a product x, the satisfaction that you have derived here can be measured by the summation of all. Summation refers to addition of all the utilities you have derived or rather you have felt, you have measured after having each of that n unit. That means if for example n is equal to 10, the first fruit that you have had here or rather the first unit of product x that you must have consumed, what level of satisfaction you received or rather whatever level of satisfaction you have got there, you have noted that thing. Second then the next satisfaction level, third unit, next satisfaction level. So whatever satisfaction level you have had for all these 10 units, you just add it, and whatever answer you get there, that is the total unit here, or rather total utility that you have figured out. Now symbolically it is measured, or rather it is figured out like this. Let's read it out. TUN, that means n number of, or rather n, figure out, n stands for the total number of units that you must have had. Utility 1, utility 2, utility 3, plus utility n. This is the total utility that would have been appreciated, or rather that would have been figured out using all these things. Now this is what you need to understand. Total utility is the addition of all these utilities that you have derived after having every unit of that product. Or the next figure out can be, or rather the next thing that we can think of is TUN is equal to integral of UI, that is a utility, and I is equal to 1, 2, 3 n. That means this thing just gives you the basic thing. Rather symbolically, you can either write it like summation, or you can figure out the answer like this. This is the integration part of it. You don't need to pay much attention, but this is a symbolical thing that has been explained here. Now, where TUN is the total utility obtained from the consumption of n units of goods. So this basically that we're talking about. So where this TUN refers to the total utility obtained from consuming n number of units of a good. The next one will be where UI stands, that means this specific thing stands for the utility of the ith good, or rather ith unit of X. That means whatever number of consumptions you have had, if you have had 1, I stands for the number of units you have had. If it is 1, then 1. If it is 2 units that you have had, then 2. If it is 3, then 3. Now, the next concept that we are discussing is the average utility. When it comes to average utility, it is derived by dividing the total utility obtained by the consumer with the number of units of a commodity X consumed. That means whatever total utility you have figured out. So basically for average utility, you need total utility that you have derived, that is divided by the number of units. That means number of units consumed. This is the basic formula that you need to use. So whatever total utility you must have derived here, that you need to divide it by the number of consumptions that you have had. So for example, if you have had 10 fruits, then the denominator will be 10 fruits, and the numerator will be the satisfaction that you have derived after consuming all these 10 units. So individually you have to add them, and you have to figure out the total utility here. Hence, average utility is equal to total utility upon the number of consumptions, or other number of units consumed. This is the basic formula that you need to keep in mind. Now, the next part refers to average utility, the formula that is basically TUX upon NX. Now here, where TUX, that means that stands for this X, basically it is mentioned as this TUX. This X refers to the number of units. That means 1, 2, 3, dot dot dot, it goes like that. So total utility obtained from the consumption of goods X, that is TU, and NX is the number of units of goods X consumed. This is what has been mentioned here. Now, the next concept that we'll be discussing is the marginal utility. As you know, marginal utility is the addition, or rather every unit that you consumed, how much level of utility is adding up to the previous utility is the marginal utility. So if you have had like 100 units of certain product, will 101 unit give you the same kind of satisfaction? Will it be lower? Will it be completely diminishing? Will it be negative? Is something that you figure out when you approach, or rather when you take the marginal utility approach here. Marginal utility is the additional utility derived from the consumption of an additional unit of a commodity. So whatever additional unit of a commodity that you have, or rather that you consume, what is the additional satisfaction level that you get here has been explained in here. Alternatively, it is the change that takes place in the total utility by the consumption of additional unit of a commodity. For example, if 10 units are consumed and you have received a satisfaction of total utility which is 20. Now the 11th unit that you have, that means plus 1, will give you additional 21, or will it give you 20, or will it go down? This is something that you need to figure out. So this change that you figure out is done only via marginal utility because of the additional unit that you consume here. For example, the additional satisfaction that a consumer gains from consuming nth unit, that is the additional unit of x, is the marginal utility mu of that x unit, or rather that unit of x. Marginal utility can be positive, zero, or negative. It can be positive, that means it is adding up. It can be negative, or rather it can be zero. Negative, that is it is going down. Zero, that is it stays at the same. So in here 21 will be positive, this will be zero, this will be negative. You had 20 units. Okay, now 21 is addition because you have derived, or rather you have figured out one additional satisfaction. 19 is negative because it has gone down, and 20 is still the same like that, hence it is zero. So marginal utility can be positive, it can be zero, or it can be negative, just for your reference. Now symbolically it is also mentioned as mu, that is marginal utility is equal to tu minus tun minus 1. So total utility that you have derived, where, or rather we can talk about, marginal utility is equal to change in total utility upon change in quantity. So if I have to explain you this formula, this TUN, that means total utility of n number, for example 10 here, minus total utility of 10 minus one additional unit. That means one additional unit that you have consumed, whatever satisfaction that you have received here, it will be in this part. Or the next formula that has been mentioned here is change in total utility upon change in quantity. That means change in total utility upon change in quantity will give you marginal utility. This is the formula. Now let's go to the next part of this. Here mu stands for the marginal utility obtained from the nth unit that we have explained. Tu stands for the total utility obtained from all the n units of goods egg, and tun minus 1 stands for total utility obtained from the n minus 1 units, that is the additional unit that you have received here, or rather that you have consumed. Now tu in that other formula, that stands for change in total utility. The next stands for, that is delta q, stands for change in the quantity of a commodity. That means whatever quantity have changed, if it was 10 units earlier, now it has gone to 11 units, that is one additional. So change in quantity is what? 1 unit. Now positive marginal utility, we have discussed about the marginal utility being positive, negative, and zero. Let's talk about the positive marginal utility here. When the consumption of an additional unit of a commodity increases total utility, then the marginal utility of that unit will be positive. If the total utility due to the consumption of one additional unit is going up, then it is known as positive marginal utility. For example, if the total utility is 20, all right, if you have one additional unit here, if you have one additional unit and this is going to 21, that means total unit is, or rather total utility is going to 21. Here we can assume, or rather here we can presume, that the marginal utility has increased the total utility here, hence this can be called as positive marginal utility. Let's talk about the next part. Zero marginal utility. When the consumption of an additional unit of a good leads to no change in the total utility, then marginal utility of that unit is zero. Tu is 20, and if you have additional one unit and this also stays 20, that means if the total utility is 20 and after having one additional unit, the utility that you have derived is zero. There is no change. Earlier also it was 20, now also it is 20. Then in such case, this scenario is known as zero marginal utility. Now, the next concept refers to negative marginal utility. When consumption of an additional unit of a commodity leads to decline in total utility, then the marginal utility of that unit is negative. So if the consumption of that specific unit or whatever unit you must have had leads to decline in the total utility. For example, if the total utility was 20 again, with additional unit that you have taken, if this goes down to 19, then this scenario is a part of negative marginal utility here. So these are the three kind of things, or three different variants of marginal utility that you can think of. Now, laws of cardinal utility analysis. With cardinal utility, you need to figure out what are the laws related to it. First is, founders of cardinal utility analysis have developed two basic laws which are critical and have several economic implications. That means whoever has found out the law of cardinal utility approach, they've mentioned that they've developed the law with two basic things, which are first of all critical and have several economic implications. That means there are a lot of economic implications, there are a lot of data statistics that has been put into it, and it is all on the basis of hearsay, or rather we can say about data analysis that has been mentioned here, hence economic implications. Now, these two laws are as follows. What are the basic two laws? First of law of diminishing marginal utility, and the next is law of equimarginal utility. So there are two basic laws which are derived out of cardinal utility, or rather cardinal utility approach. First is law of diminishing marginal utility, next is law of equimarginal utility. So these, or rather these two laws can be discussed in depth when we go on that concept of law of diminishing marginal utility and law of equimarginal utility. Right now, for our reference, these are the only details that you need to understand when you have to understand the basic concepts of this specific chapter, that is theory of consumer behavior. So when a consumer behavior has to be analyzed, you need to understand these basic concepts, because if you don't understand these basic concepts in the near future, when you understand the law of diminishing marginal utility, or rather when you understand the concept of equimarginal utility, it will be very difficult for you to understand. Hence, these are the details that you need to think of. So this is all for the video that we have discussed right now, and rather this is the end of this specific concept, rather basic concepts of theory of consumer behavior. Thank you.